that words are not inherently related to their meaning. For example, the word nomu, which means drink in Japanese, is just an arbitrary convention for capturing the meaning of drinking, just as the word drink is an arbitrary label in English. On the other hand, gesture is imagistic and idiosyncratic, which means that the form of gesture directly relates to its meaning. If I describe drinking from a sake cup in Kyoto, highly recommended by the way, my gesture would shape itself to that particular action. But if I describe drinking from a beer stein in Munich, also recommended, my gesture would adjust accordingly. McNeil's theory states that gesture and speech are simply two sides of the same thought, and only by considering them together would you be able to understand someone's complete message. For example, suppose a friend described to you how he got into a car accident by saying, "I didn't see it coming." And now picture your friend showing how the cars collided by simultaneously making a T gesture. The combination of the speech and gesture would reveal what happened. The reason your friend didn't see it coming was that the other car blindsided him from the passenger side. One way to think about this relationship is to consider the behavior of running. To run properly, you need to coordinate your arms and your feet. Sure, you can run without moving your arms, but it looks kind of funny and it just makes it a lot harder. Just as it's most optimal to move your arms and legs together when you run, coordinating your hands and your mouth is most natural when you speak. So if gestures are so prevalent and such a fundamental part of language in humans, we should use them differently than other animals that do not have language. Let's turn to that piece of evidence next. The leading expert on comparing gestures in humans and non-humans is Michael Tomasello. Tomasello theorizes that human language is unique not because it's special in and of itself, but because it's built on special social skills that have evolved uniquely and distinctively in humans. This quote nicely captures his position. Asking why only humans use language is like asking why only humans build skyscrapers, when the fact is that only humans among primates build freestanding shelters at all. What Tomasello is saying is that of course language is unique, but that's obvious. What's unique about language is so much broader than that. What's unique are more fundamental social skills that comprise what he calls shared intentionality. For one thing, we are driven to share attention and cooperate with one another. And secondly, we are remarkable mind readers. For Tomasello, both of these basic functions, these basic social functions, manifest themselves first in children's hand gestures. Even though animals such as chimps can be trained to point at things, their gestures all attempt to satisfy immediate desires, such as getting a reward. Human gestures have two additional functions. One is simply to share attention with other people. To appreciate this, consider how much pointing happens when you read a picture book to a 2-year-old. The child is not requesting anything. If she points to a picture of the moon, she doesn't really want the moon. She simply wants to share attention to it, even if she's pointed to it 100 times before. That is a uniquely human behavior. A second unique function is to offer help. Imagine you're in a cafe and you notice another customer drop a $10 bill as she walks by your table to pay. Most people would reflexively make eye contact with the person and point to the money on the ground, even though they would profit from taking the money themselves. This cooperative use of gesture is distinctive to humans. If a chimp saw food being dropped by another chimp, it wouldn't point. If anything, it would act selfishly and take the food for itself. In both of these examples, note the complex mind reading that is required. In the first case, the adult and child each have to know that pointing to the picture of the moon is not a request for the moon, and crucially, they have to know that the other knows it too. And in the cafe example, the other customer has to know that you're not requesting the $10 bill for yourself in a finder's keeper sort of way. The key is that you both mutually know that the intention is to be cooperative. Without this mutual knowledge of intentions, both interactions would go quite differently. This mind reading happens all the time with humans, and without it, gestures would take on quite different meanings. I bet that some of you are dog people, so I should mention that canines are the kings of gesture compared to the rest of the animal kingdom. Not only are they great at following human pointing gestures to identify objects that they desire, they can even produce gestures themselves to point out those objects to humans. But still, dogs come up short in more sophisticated uses of gesture. For example, they have very little interest in gestures about objects that do not benefit them. And they can't use gestures to learn new things that are not in the here and now. For example, imagine an infant watching an adult point to an opaque bucket and say the word Modi. Then silently, the adult pulls out a novel object from that bucket and a different object from a different bucket and puts them both in front of the child. If the adult then asks for the Modi, so where's the Modi? 18-month-old infants would hand over the correct object, even though they never directly saw it labeled. This is pretty remarkable. But if you did the same experiment with a dog, it would just wag its tail. It just wouldn't get it. According to Tomasello, these differences in how humans and non-humans use and interpret gestures are at the heart of what makes us different from all other species. Humans use gestures as a way to read minds and coordinate actions with others. This mind reading and social cooperation is what language is all about. And the fact that gesture is such a handy tool for doing it speaks volumes about its importance. So it seems that gestures are not only prevalent in humans, they're used uniquely by humans. Let's turn now to the benefits of these uniquely human gestures. But before I reveal the final clue, let me ask you a question. Why do you think we gesture? Or put another way, who do you think we gesture for? If the first thing that popped into your head is that we gesture for other people, you'd have company. That's what most people think. And you'd be right. We do gesture for others. But that's only half the story. The other reason we gesture is a surprise to many people. Scientific research shows that we also gesture for ourselves. You can think of these as the external function, we gesture for the benefit of others, and the internal function, we gesture for our own benefit. As you'll soon see, a single gesture often has both functions. So let's break them down in order. First, let's consider what gesture does for other people. Outside of sign language, the clearest example of gesture that is designed for other people is what's called an emblem. These are conventionalized hand shapes that often stand alone in their meaning. The OK sign is an emblem. So is the thumbs up gesture. But don't make a thumbs up gesture in Greece because it means something very different there. There it means something more like a gesture with the middle finger. Don't do it. According to Adam Kendon, one of the pioneers of modern gesture research, emblems have the advantage of not needing speech, which works well in situations requiring discretion or stealth. Another advantage is that they're effective at a distance in noisy environments. If you've ever wandered a crowded marketplace in a big city or been on the trading floor of a major stock exchange, you've no doubt seen a flurry of these emblems. By the way, neuroimaging research shows that the brain treats these emblems just like actual spoken words. The most widespread gestures are the ones that accompany speech, like the ones I've been producing in this lecture. These co-speech gestures play all sorts of roles in communication. As I mentioned earlier, young children use adult gestures to help them learn the meaning of words. There's also evidence that gestures produced by parents affect children's language skills later in life. For example, Meredith Rowe at Harvard has found that the more a parent gestured to children at 14 months of age, the larger the children's vocabulary 3 years later. A second function is that gestures help make a message clearer. If I were to tell you that a colleague was up late last night, My accompanying drinking gesture would help you better understand why he looked so under the weather this morning. And research shows that people don't often notice when information is slipped by in gesture. I wonder how many lawyers use this trick in the courtroom. Because gesture adds meaning to speech, it can be used to help people learn new things. Have you ever taken a foreign language course? I bet there was a lot of gesture. Research out of my lab at Colgate shows that these gestures can improve recall and retention by up to 50%. And even if your language skills have gotten a little bit rusty, you can always compensate in a foreign country by using your hands. Just go easy on the thumbs up gesture in Athens. Not only do co-speech gestures help make a person's message clear, they help a person make a better impression. For example, in the context of the classroom, research shows that students like teachers who gesture during a lecture more than ones who don't. Not only that, students say that they learn more from teachers who gesture. Gesture can also function to build rapport between people. As many successful salespeople and politicians already know, subtly mimicking another person's gestures can increase persuasiveness. Kristen Casers of the University of Amsterdam has used fMRI to show that this mirroring of others' gestures even causes people's brains to become synchronized. This sort of neural coupling can lead to feelings of trust. But there's a catch. If others notice that you're intentionally mirroring them, the spell is broken. To most people, it's a bit counterintuitive that gesture would also serve a purpose for the person producing it. After all, why would moving your hands affect what comes out of your mouth? Traditional views of language, like Chomsky's theory, they don't offer good answers to this question. For them, language should be its own special thing, separated off from other things like the body. But embodied theories of language not only explain why we gesture, they actually predict it. If gesturing is like moving your arms while running, it's no surprise that people gesture while speaking. It makes speaking so much easier. Have you ever been stuck trying to come up with a word only to be saved by your gestures? That's because gestures have access to your thoughts in a different way than your words do. So moving your hands can move your mind. An extreme example of this is what Susan Goldenmeadow at the University of Chicago calls a gesture-speech mismatch. A mismatch is when someone says one thing with their words, but another with their hands. Goldenmeadow shows that the combination of both things reveals the complete thought. You must combine them together. For example, we all know as adults that changing the appearance of something, such as a tall glass of water, by transforming